It's been a while since we took a look at Lexus's compact luxury crossover in America, the Lexus NX. Since 2015, the compact luxury segment has changed drastically because not only has the Lexus NX become the best-selling compact luxury crossover in America, but this segment has also become considerably larger and more full of competition. 2018 brought us a completely redesigned BMW X3, a completely redesigned Volvo XC40, and of course the completely redesigned Audi Q5. Into that mix, we also have a number of entries that just didn't exist before, like the Alfa Romeo Stelvio and of course the Porsche Macan. That's why Lexus decided to give this vehicle a mid-cycle refresh after having only been on sale for about 3 years. For 2018, the NX comes in 3 basic flavors. We have the NX 300H, which is the hybrid model, and that's what we're taking a look at right here. Then we get the NX 300, which is the turbocharged model, formerly known as the NX 200T, that gets a slightly different version of what we're seeing right here on this front end. Then we get the NX 300 F Sport, which still uses a 2-liter turbocharged engine under the hood. F Sport is the Lexus looks better, handles better package. It doesn't actually add any extra power under the hood. Since this is a mid-cycle refresh, not a complete redesign, the NX is still the same size that it was before, at 182.3 inches long. That puts the NX right about the same size as the Mercedes-Benz GLC and about 3 or 4 inches shorter than a BMW X3. The overall size of the NX seems to confuse a few people because there was a point in time where the Lexus RX was the direct competitor to the BMW X3, but now it really is the Lexus NX because this is about the same size as the X3 and the RX is actually quite a bit bigger. Interestingly enough, this model is actually about the same size on the outside as the original Lexus RX. The important thing to remember is that this is a compact crossover, not a subcompact crossover. Lexus actually is launching the all-new UX crossover, which looks suspiciously like this, but is considerably shorter, and that will be the model that will compete with the BMW X1, the Mercedes-Benz GLA, and the Audi Q3. As before, the NX is quite heavily styled. We have the sort of Nike swoosh look here to the rear tail lamp modules that mimics what was going on up front. And they've given us a slight tweak to the overall bumper design to keep things fresh for 2018. Since we're driving the hybrid model, the exhaust is actually hidden there under the rear bumper. Be sure and let me know what you think about the looks of the NX down there in the comment section below. There was a time where Lexus was accused of making boring looking vehicles, but that's definitely not the case anymore. Whether you love this design or hate this design, you have to admit that it definitely doesn't look like anything else out on the road. We don't really see any changes under the hood for 2018, so there's still 2 engines under here. The first one is a 2-liter turbo that produces 235 horsepower. That's mated to a 6-speed automatic transmission, sending power right here to the front wheels by default, all 4 if you choose that option. Fuel economy, depending on the options you choose, should come in between 24 and 25 miles per gallon combined. Then we have the NX 300H, which gets this Lexus hybrid system that is very unique in this segment because other manufacturers have plug-in hybrids, but Lexus is the only one with a traditional hybrid at this moment. This is based around a 2.5-liter 4-cylinder engine that produces 154 horsepower by itself and 2 motor generator units that combine to give you 194 horsepower total. There's also a 67 horsepower electric motor in the rear that gives this electric all-wheel drive. Fuel economy comes in at 31 miles per gallon combined, and all-wheel drive is standard with this engine. The overall design of this hybrid system is very similar to what we see in the RX hybrid, only the RX of course gets a V6 instead of the 4-cylinder engine. Because the overall design of this hybrid system is essentially the same as the system in the large RX, the limitations are also the same. This system can deliver 67 horsepower to the rear axle maximum and an undisclosed amount of torque. Lexus unfortunately doesn't really give us that particular specification, but 194 horsepower is possible to the front wheels and probably around 220 pound-feet of torque or so. I'm going to give front seat comfort 7 out of 10 points. These seats are not as adjustable as we see in many of the European competitors. For instance, we have only a 2-way lumbar support, not a 4-way lumbar support. We don't find inflatable side bolsters, available seat massage, or extending thigh cushions. All of those things you will find on the competition. Now keep in mind that we are in a luxury crossover, not a mainstream crossover, so even though I'm giving this 7 out of 10 points, these seats are more comfortable than we see, for instance, in a Hyundai Tucson or a Ford Escape. Power seats are standard, but the passenger seat does not have the same range of motion as the driver's seat. This seat is missing the 2-way lumbar support, and in many of the European competitors, the passenger seat has the same range of motion as the driver's seat. Even though the NX is overall a little bit short for this segment, legroom is among the best. And that's because of that front-wheel drive layout we have up there, so it makes the interior dimensions a little bit more efficient. Lexus also seems to have prioritized rear passenger room a little bit over cargo room in the back. So with this front seat adjusted for me at 6 feet tall, I still have about 4 inches of legroom left. Headroom is not quite as generous as the legroom, however. My hair is barely brushing the ceiling, but most importantly, my head is not touching the ceiling if I sit upright. If I move over to the middle, I also still have enough headroom that I can easily sit upright without my head touching the ceiling. And a nice touch is that we don't really have much of a hump right here in the middle. We only have about a rise of perhaps about 3/4 of an inch. Scooting all the way over to the right side of the vehicle, this front seat's all the way back in its tracks. I had a 6'5" person sitting up there. I still have about 1/2 inch to 1 inch of legroom left. Helping improve rear seat comfort, our model has the power recline feature. This also works with the power fold feature. So we fold the seat all the way like that to the most upright position, press it again, and then we can fold that seat completely forward. Because of the way that Lexus has prioritized rear seat legroom over cargo room, and of course the fact that this rear hatch is not terribly horizontal, we definitely have this strong rake right here, we find less cargo capacity behind this hatch than in the competition. 17.7 cubic feet of storage space back here versus 31 cubic feet in the all-new QX50. Even something like a Mercedes-Benz GLC, which is relatively inefficient in terms of overall storage space versus the exterior size, still comes in about 3 cubic feet ahead of this. Of course, if you want a Lexus with more storage space in the back, you can get the Lexus RX, which has an absolutely enormous cargo area compared with this, or that BMW X3. The cargo cover is one of the hard variety, not a roller style. That's not my preference because it is a little bit more difficult to deal with. However, Lexus has given us a location right here under the cargo area load floor where you can stow that out of the way and still maintain that flat load floor. Taking another look under there, you'll notice that we also have a rarity for a hybrid vehicle or a modern compact luxury crossover. That's a spare tire. There's also some additional storage space right there in that well. As we look around the interior, keep in mind that we are in a relatively fully loaded hybrid model. We have a standard moonroof right there that extends just over the front passenger and driver's heads. There's no panoramic moonroof option in this vehicle at this time. We have height adjustable shoulder belts for the driver and the front passenger, and two-way adjustable headrests. The stitching pattern on the seat back and seat bottom cushion changes depending on the version of the NX you're looking at. These seats feature perforated center sections on the back and bottom because these seats are both heated and ventilated. Moving over to the front door panels, we find a stitched upper section right there, a stitched armrest, soft touch plastics right there between the two, and then hard plastics lower on the door as we see in many of the other entries. It's a little bit difficult to tell on camera, but this is real wood trim that we find on the doors and the dashboard. It's a very dark tinted wood, so that's why it's a little bit difficult to see right here. The dashboard is made from a few different types of material. We get a soft touch upper section and then a stitched lower section. These are actually different pieces of material that were stitched together and then applied to the dashboard itself. On the driver's side, we again find that soft touch instrument cluster and then hard plastics right below that on either side of the instrument cluster. On the passenger side, we find a bin-style glove compartment with enough room inside for a large tablet computer. Built into the center of the dashboard, we find two all-new LCD infotainment systems. Since we're driving the top-end trim, this model has the larger widescreen LCD. The infotainment software is very similar to what we see in the brand new Lexus LS. We have a main screen here where we can choose between the various different options across the bottom. For instance, our built-in apps like Pandora, iHeartRadio, NPR One, Yelp, Fuel, Stocks, etc. You can also get climate control readouts, the built-in mapping system, of course, because we do have factory navigation. Unlike most of the other luxury compact crossovers, we don't find Apple CarPlay or Android Auto in this display. Below the infotainment LCD, we find two large air vents, the controls for the climate control system, as well as heated and ventilated seat controls, and then this extremely stylized center console. This is definitely a love it or hate it design. Let me know what you think about this down there in the comment section below. The overall design is intended to mimic the spindle grille that we see up front with these large buttresses on either side. Below that button bank, we find a single-slot optical disc player, some controls for the infotainment system, eject, direct access to radio, media, track forward, backward, etc. Find a power volume knob and a tune knob on that other side. And then below that we have the drive mode button. We press for normal, we twist for eco, and then twist the other direction for sport. Below that we have an EV mode button, a button to disable the traction control system, auto brake hold button right there and its status icon, button for the electric parking brake, and then we have the controller for the infotainment system. This is one of Lexus's touchpad controllers, very much like you see on a notebook. It's gotten a little bit larger for 2018, but still functions basically the same. We have a direct map button right there, menu button, back button, And then you interact with the system using this touchpad. The touchpad clicks when you've selected an option on the screen to give you a little bit of haptic feedback. However, if I move up here back to the screen, you'll see my particular problem with this system. Choosing an option is a little bit difficult because you're dragging your finger across and you really do have to pay attention to what's going on this screen in order to interact with it. Behind the touch controller, there's a padded wrist rest, 2 large cup holders, and then under this slot, we have a little storage cubby where you can put glasses or other things like that in there. And then on the back of there's a mirror if for some reason the mirror in the sun visor wasn't enough. Instead of using a joystick style shifter that we see in many hybrids these days, Lexus decided to use a more traditional gated shifter. So we have neutral there, drive all the way back, sport mode is over to the left, and then we push away from the driver for gear up, pull towards the driver for gear down. Even though this is a hybrid vehicle, the hybrid system will imitate stepped ratios. Between the front seats, we have a padded armrest. This opens to reveal a 2-tiered storage compartment where we have one little removable divider right there with coin holders in it. And under here is where we find 2 USB inputs, an auxiliary input, and of course, a 12-volt power port. There's a decent amount of room right in there, so you can put wallets, keys, that sort of thing. The instrument cluster features 2 large dials. Over here on the left, we have a power, eco, and charge gauge that also changes to a tachometer if you're in sport mode. And then we have that large speedometer over there on the right. In between everything, we have a color multifunction display that gives us our typical trip computer readouts, status of the active safety systems. We also have audio system information, and of course the ability to adjust certain vehicle settings like the way those safety systems behave. The steering wheel is a pretty familiar design. It's thickly rimmed, it has sport grips up top and this large center spoke at the bottom. This steering wheel is heated in our particular trim. On the back we find shift paddles down on the left and up on the right. On the right side of the wheel we find buttons that control that multifunction LCD, page change button and back button right there. We also have the lane keeping assistance, enable and disable button, and a button to alter the following distance for the standard radar adaptive cruise control. As with other Lexus models, the cruise control is on a stalk that turns with the steering wheel right down there. On the other side of the steering wheel, we find the controls for the infotainment system, volume up, down, track forward, backward, mode, voice command, and then of course some dedicated phone buttons. In our acceleration tests, this model took 8.5 seconds to go from 0 to 60. That is on the slow side for the luxury compact crossover segment because many of the entry-level vehicles with which this competes will go 0 to 60 around 6 seconds or so. This is also notably slower than the other hybrid in this particular group at the moment, the Volvo XC60 hybrid. And that's because the XC60 hybrid has kind of a dual mission. It's also the best performing XC60 in addition to being the most efficient XC60. Now, this is about 0.7 of a second slower than the Toyota RAV4 hybrid that actually uses the same hybrid system and the same electric all-wheel drive system. The main reason for that is that the Lexus NX is about 250 pounds heavier than the RAV4. That's of course because the NX is a relative of the RAV4. It's not simply a RAV4 that has been Lexusified. So this vehicle has unique sheet metal, it has a unique interior, other unique components, more sound deadening, etc. And that's why this doesn't drive quite like a RAV4 either. On the downside, all of that adds weight, and that means that this is a little bit slower. Now, if you get the front-wheel drive version of the NX hybrid, which is not available in the United States at this time, it is available overseas, however, then it will actually go 0 to 60 a little bit faster because we get the same kind of horsepower out of the vehicle total, but we get a little bit less weight since it doesn't have a motor in the rear. In our braking tests, this vehicle stopped from 60 miles an hour back to 0 in 118 feet, which is a fairly respectable score considering the curb weight of this hybrid model. Now again, you will get slightly shorter braking scores if you're in an area where you can actually buy the 2-wheel drive version of this hybrid. The important thing to know about this electric all-wheel drive system is that the main design goal with this system was to improve all-weather traction. So whether you're on snow or ice or on a wet, slippery surface like we're on here, the goal is to help get all 4 wheels moving so you don't get stuck, or so you feel a little bit more sure-footed. That's important to keep in mind because that's a little bit different than what we see in, for instance, the Volvo XC60 hybrid, which uses a more powerful motor in the rear, a bigger battery pack, and that system is a little bit more targeted at performance than economy overall. The Volvo system has the ability through software to command maximum power to the rear axle under a wider variety of situations. So it has an all-wheel drive mode that can attempt to balance power front to rear a little bit more equitably, up to around 160 horsepower total, and we can't do that in the Lexus because the battery is a little bit smaller. And that means that the battery alone is not going to be able to send that much power to the rear. In order to send more power to the rear, the engine actually has to generate it using the motor generator units that are built into the transaxle. That means that the front wheels are also spinning in the process of generating power and sending it to the rear. It's also worth noting that this electric all-wheel drive system does not increase your total horsepower in the vehicle. So if you're in a market where you can get a front-wheel drive version of the Lexus NX hybrid, in the United States they're all the electric all-wheel drive version at this time, you will actually get the same combined system horsepower that we find in this model. So it's not electric rear motor unit plus what's going on up front. What's going on up front and the electric unit in the rear all combined to the same system total. That's mainly due to the size of the battery pack, as I said. The big thing to know here is that the electric rear axle in the NX does not really aid in the handling ability of this vehicle. So as you go around a corner power on, it's not like this vehicle can send more power to the rear. That said, handling in the NX is quite good, but it's up against some really stiff competition. And that's why I'm giving this model a B- overall. That raises up to a B if you get the regular turbocharged model. The luxury compact crossover segment is suddenly full of options that really have handling in mind, like the Jaguar F-Pace, the Porsche Macan, and of course the Alfa Romeo Stelvio. And that's in addition to vehicles that have always had handling in mind, like the Mercedes-Benz GLC and the BMW X3. The key thing that all of those vehicles have in common, of course, is that they're rear-wheel drive based vehicles. So those all-wheel drive systems, when equipped, will still send most of the power to the rear axle, and they're better weight balanced than what we see here in the Lexus NX, and that really does aid in handling. However, the NX is quite comparable to vehicles like the Infiniti QX50, certain trims of the Volvo XC60, and of course the Acura RDX. When Lexus first introduced the NX crossover a few years ago, they made kind of an interesting statement. They said that conceptually, the NX and the Lexus IS rear-wheel drive luxury sedan are more aligned with one another than the Lexus ES and the Lexus RX crossover. They kind of split their crossovers into two sort of distinct categories. I found that statement interesting, of course, because the Lexus IS is a rear-wheel drive vehicle and the Lexus NX starts as a front-wheel drive vehicle. So dynamically, they're obviously quite different there. However, the statement has some merit because the overall tuning of this vehicle is definitely more in line with the IS. The suspension is definitely stiffer. This definitely has more of a sporting mission in mind than we see in the Lexus RX. Handling is obviously the beneficiary of the firmer suspension, but it does take a toll on the ride. So if you were hoping that the Lexus NX was going to ride sort of like the Lexus RX's Mini-Me, then you may be a little bit disappointed. If that's what you're looking for, you should see something like the Lexus MKC, because it definitely has a very comfortable and livable ride. I found the ride in the NX to be just a little bit too firm for my tastes. Of course, you can get an even firmer NX if that's what you're after, and that would be in the F Sport. But in the United States, you cannot get an F Sport hybrid, although again, that's available in other world markets. In our cabin noise testing, we recorded 73 decibels at 50 miles an hour, making this on the loud side for the compact luxury segment. Although we get more sound deadening than the average mainstream compact crossover, we seem to have a little bit less than some of those newer luxury entries. It's really obvious when it comes to road noise. Wind noise is very well controlled in the NX, but there is more road noise coming into this cabin than something like the GLC or the new X3. According to the EPA, the model that we're driving is rated for 31 miles per gallon combined. Over a week of very mixed driving and about 400 miles or so, we've been averaging 28.5 miles per gallon. That is notably below that EPA score. The likely reason that the overall fuel economy score drops below the EPA average is because I drive up and over a 2,200-foot mountain pass every day, and this battery pack gets full before I'm all the way at the bottom. In fact, this battery pack is full about a quarter of the way down the hill. And that's also likely why the Volvo XC60 plug-in hybrid scored almost as well as this vehicle, even though it delivers considerably more power, because it is able to recapture all of that energy going down the hill, and that does have a positive impact on fuel economy. Of course, it's difficult to compare this to the Volvo plug-in hybrid because it's a plug-in hybrid and this is not. For 2018, Lexus has given the NX a little bit of a price bump. It now starts just under $36,000. The hybrid model that we were driving is actually a little bit less expensive, however, than it was last year, starting just over $38,000. The revised pricing structure likely means that more shoppers are going to be buying that hybrid model because now there's less of a hybrid penalty to be paid. When you remember that the NX hybrid comes only with the electric all-wheel drive system in America, you'll see that it actually is a pretty good deal when stacked up against that base turbo all-wheel drive model. As with most luxury vehicles in America, there are a ton of different standalone options and option packages available, and you can add an awful lot to the price tag of your NX. So we're actually just going to move right beyond that and move on into the takeaways section. One of the first things to keep in mind with the NX is that, like some of the luxury compact crossovers, leather upholstery is not standard. So if you do want leather upholstery, you will have to pay extra for that. And that will end up being a little bit more expensive than some of the European competitors that have leather standard. The big thing, however, is that despite the recent refresh for the 2018 model year, the Lexus NX feels like it's being left behind a little bit. Lexus has been quite aggressive at the overall pricing strategy with the NX. It does start less expensive than the bulk of the mainline luxury options, and reliability has been quite high. Fuel economy is good across the board, and especially good in city driving if you buy the hybrid model, but when it comes to performance, handling, and luxury features, the NX really has fallen down lower in the pack. Of course, as I said at the beginning of the video, that shouldn't be too surprising because just about every other entry in this segment is new or significantly refreshed for either the 2018 or 2019 model year. One of those new models is the all-new Infiniti QX50. The QX50 was a relatively small mover in this segment in the past, but this model year I expect that it's going to be right up there with the Acura RDX and the Lexus NX in terms of overall sales. That's because the overall nature of the QX50 changed drastically with this generation. Infiniti's all-new small crossover really impressed me with its aggressive pricing, high fuel economy, and extremely well-done interior. Because Infiniti moved the QX50 from a rear-wheel drive platform to a front-wheel drive platform, they gained an awful lot of interior volume. So the back seat is very generous, as is the cargo area. You get significantly more room back there than you find in the Lexus NX, or of course a BMW X3 or Mercedes GLC. If you're looking for a roomy, comfortable, and luxurious ride, the QX50 is definitely an excellent buy. It also has been priced aggressively, so it will compete very directly with the Lexus NX. On the downside, the QX50 is not as powerful as many of the European alternatives, and there's just one engine offered for 2018. Fuel economy is better than the non-hybrid versions of the NX 300. However, one of the ways that Infiniti gets there is by the use of a continuously variable transmission. So if you're not a fan of the way CVTs drive, you probably don't want to look at the Infiniti. Next up, we have the Acura RDX. The RDX is one of the better selling vehicles in this category, even though the current RDX is quite old. But of course, I am talking about the all-new 2019 RDX that I had a chance to sit in at the New York Auto Show and that we will be driving in the next few weeks. Although the RDX is billed as a 2019 vehicle, expected in dealers relatively soon. We don't know the pricing yet, but it's likely going to be very competitive with the Lexus, as the current RDX model already is. The Acura feels more modern inside and outside than the NX, logically because it is newer. Under the hood, we have an all-new 2-liter turbocharged engine that produces 272 horsepower that's mated to a 10-speed automatic transmission. This is basically the same engine that we find in the Civic Type R, turned down just a little bit. The 10-speed automatic transmission is one of Honda's brand new transmissions. It has been excellent so far in the Honda Accord as well as in the Honda Odyssey. Only in the RDX, they're pairing it with their torque vectoring super handling all-wheel drive system. The cargo area in the RDX is quite generous, and Acura is tossing in all the latest gadgets in their new model. Be sure and stay tuned because we will be driving that very soon. So at the moment I can't really talk about how the RDX drives, but it does look like it's going to be a very strong competitor to the Lexus. Next up, we have the compact SUV that actually seems to be beating Lexus at the sales game in the 2018 calendar year, the recently redesigned Mercedes-Benz GLC. The GLC starts about $4,000 more than the Lexus NX, and that difference will increase as you start adding options to both vehicles. When comparably equipped, the Mercedes-Benz GLC is always going to be notably more expensive than the Lexus NX. But that extra cash buys you one of the best interiors in this segment, a rear-wheel drive layout, a 9-speed automatic transmission, and optional, very powerful engines that we just don't see in the Lexus competition. As is pretty typical for Mercedes, going from mild to wild will cost you an awful lot of money, and you can get your GLC up to fantastically expensive price points. Mercedes is also finally offering a new plug-in hybrid GLC that we haven't been able to drive yet. Although it's still not as efficient as the Lexus hybrid, especially in city driving as the Lexus NX, it does have an electric-only range. So if you're looking for that next step in the hybrid game, which would be the plug-in hybrid, then this would be an interesting option. It is worth noting that the GLC plug-in hybrid is not as efficient as the Volvo XC60 hybrid, however. Cost and projected reliability are obviously the main downsides to the Mercedes, so if those are a concern to you, then the Lexus NX is going to be a better option. The GLC also has less room in the back seat and less cargo room than the average entry in this group, but interestingly enough, when pitted against the Lexus NX, because of the overall shorter size of the Lexus, the NX actually has less room in the back. Moving along to our next competitor, I actually happened to have the BMW X3 the same time that I had the Lexus NX, so expect that review to be coming up next week. As with the Mercedes, the BMW is likely going to be less reliable. However, in just about every other metric, I think the BMW beats the Lexus NX. The handling is better in the BMW, the ride quality is also better in the BMW, even if you don't choose the adaptive suspension system. I think it's just a better balance overall. Seat comfort is superior in the BMW and the seats are more adjustable. Cargo space is also quite generous, and the BMW I think looks a little bit less polarizing. Now, it's not quite as exciting or as adventurous in terms of overall styling, but I do think that restrained styling is more attractive. Be sure and let me know what you think about that down there in the comment section below. The BMW also wins over the Lexus when it comes to available gadgetry. BMW's latest iDrive system is very easy to use. I think it's more intuitive than what we see in the Lexus NX, and it offers Apple CarPlay integration, which is very handy. And the touchscreen in the dashboard is much easier to use than that little touchpad that we find in the Lexus. Now on the downside, the BMW is going to cost you more, so it's a very similar downside to what we saw in the Mercedes. The X3 starts at $41,000. That is notably more than the Lexus NX. So although I do think that the BMW X3 is a better vehicle, it's not necessarily going to be a better buy. You will have to pay extra for that extra feel on the interior and the extra handling ability. The Lexus NX is far from a bad choice in this segment, but the competition hasn't been standing still, and I think that's the really big thing to remember here. The NX is a good option if you're looking for a lower sticker price and worry-free reliability, but when it comes to the question of what's the best crossover in this segment, then that's kind of a different matter. As this segment has started to grow, manufacturers are no longer trying to satisfy everybody with the same vehicle, so manufacturers seem to be going after slightly different customers in this group. The new QX50 has a much more premium interior than the NX. I think it really appeals to people that are looking for something comfortable, something roomy, and something very well built on the inside. Although the QX50 may be a little bit less reliable than the Lexus in the long term, it should still be fairly reliable in this segment. The 2019 RDX is likely going to deliver on the same value proposition that we see in the current RDX and the current MDX. It's probably going to have a price tag that is right about the same as the Lexus, only will offer you an improvement in performance, especially handling performance. It will have Acura's super handling all-wheel drive system, which the current generation RDX does not have, but the MDX, the TLX, etc. do have, and that really will be a pretty big difference between it and something like the Lexus. Of course, if you're looking for the best performance bargain, especially on the base end of this segment, then look no further than the Alfa Romeo Stelvio. The Stelvio falls behind in terms of fit and finish, reliability, and the gadget count, but it is incredibly fun to drive even in that base model, and the base model is an excellent performance buy. We then have the Audi Q5, which I think is very well rounded in this segment, as is the XC60 and the BMW X3 actually. I think those three vehicles are really fighting for the meat of this segment, people that are looking for an all-around excellent luxury crossover. And of course, if you're looking for a blend of high performance and surprisingly good fuel economy, then the Volvo XC60 plug-in hybrid would be a good option for you. But that XC60 T8 is going to be quite a bit more expensive than the Lexus hybrid. Which vehicle is right for you is kind of a tricky question, but I have to say that if I were shopping with my own money in this particular segment, I wouldn't buy the Lexus NX. It's getting just a little bit too old for my tastes. I would take one of the other options that we've discussed here in the closing section. Be sure and let me know what you would pick down there in the comment section below. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already done so. Remember that subscriptions and likes and comments on these videos help us get access to cars. So be sure and hit that subscribe button, comment on that video, share this video to friends that you think might be interested in the Lexus NX, and you can also click that button up there at the top of your screen to be taken on over to patreon.com where you can support this channel if you'd like to. I'll see you next week.